Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar here, where we're going to talk about International Road Check 2022. Now, while you folks are joining us, I want to do some quick introductions. I know some of you have seen us and gone through our webinars with us before, but some of you, this may be the first time that you have ever participated in a webinar with us. So we want to introduce ourselves. My name is Craig Hart. I am part of our events team here at Vertical Alliance Group, and my background is in distance learning. That's what I've been doing, oh gosh, for the better part of 20 years now. If you have seen our webinars or been any of our live events, you have seen my face and heard my voice, and you have also likely heard and seen my co-host, Mr. Mark Ray. Mark is like many of you. He is a retired trucking executive. He spent over 30 years with Frozen Food Express, a reefer hauler out of Dallas, Texas, as some of you may be familiar with and have seen their trucks. But he is, in his retirement, has remained an incredibly busy man as an advisor for companies both within and without the transportation industry, with a focus on emerging issues that are impacting our industry, like the electrification of fleets and autonomous driving and so forth. So Mark, it's always lovely to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, sir, for having me, and we're really looking forward to comments from Mr. Turner and CVSA, who can clearly elaborate on their successful programs facilitating enforcement and industry with many successful programs. Road check being at the top of the list, maybe, but we really appreciate Chris and the time he invests and his career that he's invested in commercial vehicle safety.
Absolutely. Chris Turner is joining us today as our guest speaker. Chris is the Director of Enforcement Data and Judicial Outreach with CVSA. He is inarguably one of our most popular guest speakers. He, from some of you may remember the webinar that we did back in the fall about data queue and how to be able to successfully dispute tickets where the information is incorrect and you want to get that off your record for your driver or your company. He also participated in our webinar last year to help you all prepare for road check because it is next month and it is a trainable opportunity for your folks. That's why we're big fans of talking with Chris, because the things that you can do to prepare for road check are things that can be done in our platform, our learning system, Infinity Workforce Solutions. So we're going to talk about that a lot today. Chris, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you, sir. It's always a pleasure to have you join us.
It really is truly my pleasure by far. You know, for Mark, I don't think we ever really retire anymore. I think we want to keep having value or trying to add value until we can't any longer. And then, you know, with your vast experience, really sometime I ought to get with you and just say, hey, how can I improve what I'm doing with your distinct background? So it's really a pleasure to be here with you and to be with all your membership to be able to talk about road check and really anywhere we need to go today. I'll do the best I can. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. So, and speaking of who knows where we will go today, as usually happens in sessions where Chris is involved, you guys have lots of great questions about things that are going to come up in regards to road check, but also his vast breadth of knowledge, being a former law enforcement officer and being with CVSA. You guys have questions, share those with us. You can do that in chat, or you can do that through the Q&A function there on your action bar as well. And then Chris and the rest of us can see those and answer those. Go ahead and fire up your chat window just so we can make sure that's working before we get underway, because once you open chat at the very bottom, there's a spot that says to, and right now it probably says hosts and panelists, and you want to change that to, click on that and it'll change it to everyone. And that way, if you have a question, chances are someone else on the call with us today has that same question, and making sure that everybody can see that it's being asked in chat is valuable. So go ahead and fire up chat. I see some of you are already letting us know where you're joining us from. Feel free to chime in on that as well. We'd love to know who you are, where you're joining us from, what company you're with, and then we'll get underway here. All right. Okay, Chris, let us know everything we need to know about this year's road check coming up next month.
Okay, I certainly will. That's a little bit toward later on in our slide deck. I am, good habit or bad habit, I tend to put more slides in than I can ever get to, and I have to go way too fast. So for today's webinar, I put much fewer slides in and really hoping we could have a good conversation about who CVSA is, about what we do, how we can help you, can facilitate things. You know, you mentioned the data queues and the previous webinar and how we're hoping to do better there with that data collection, because it's also better for carriers and drivers that, you know, officers roadside cite things correctly. We have a bunch of efforts going on in that direction with FMCSA, and they've got a whole new suite of software coming out to replace basically all 50 things that they have out there now. And maybe we can get into that at the end of it a little bit, but really more conversational today. So International Road Check, however, let's start there and kind of dig in, tell you a little bit about it and CVSA, and then we'll get to some data and then what's coming up in this year. So this year it is May 17th through 19th in 2022. I know it's kind of fluctuated a little bit there in May. For those of you who have been around a long time like I have, it used to always be the first week in, what was it, June? The first week in June, I think. And then, of course, we have our other programs as well that we'll mention briefly. But one of the things that now happens is we've included all of Canada that participates nearly completely, except a couple places, one territory in particular that doesn't even have any roads, so they don't participate. However, a few others do, most others do. But we also have included Mexico now, so we're trying to do a balancing act between those jurisdictions. In Mexico, it's brutally hot, and in the south in June, and then of course in Canada it can still be brutally cold, you know, if we were to go to April to make it work. So we're trying to find somewhere in the middle. And typically after we decide our topics and how that works at CVSA, we'll get to the road check committee. But when that works, we spend the next 45 minutes arguing over which week will be the warmest and or the coldest to make it work. So all of us suffer a little bit, and we try and make do with the dates we can to make all of our counterparts throughout North America welcome. So the point of that whole, I guess, diatribe is that all of North America participates in road check now. It's not just the US. You're going to see inspectors out in Canada, all our territories and provinces, the US and her territories as well participate. And then Mexico, not just SCT now, but also their National Guard. So they're not just doing level 5s anymore. They'll be doing driver inspections as well. Now, they don't do near as many, but they definitely do some. So let me tell you a little bit about CVSA. Next slide, please. One more after that. I had a header in there. All right, I'm not going to read that to you. You can read it. But what CVSA is and what we do. So the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, we started early in the 1980s or mid-1980s, 83, 84 is the Western states. And we've now grown to include all of Canada, the US, and Mexico. And our membership are the lead jurisdictions. There are first tier membership. So for example, when I was back in Kansas and commanding the Kansas program, we were a member of CVSA. And that is so that we can all get together and have a voice on the things that we think are most important, that we can petition FMCSA or Congress on the needs of roadside enforcement officers. But CVSA very quickly and early in our development learned that, you know, we're not certainly experts in all things. So we heavily rely on our associate members, and you'll see a slide here in a few minutes that show you how big our associate members have grown. So as you can see there, our goal really is to achieve uniformity across commercial motor vehicle inspections, first in the states. We want your inspection that you receive in Florida or Washington or Pennsylvania and Texas to be incredibly similar. There might be some differences just based on state law, but as far as the federal regulations go, and as far as the steps that you should see that inspector go through, we want them to be uniform. So you have that expectation roadside, and we're always working toward that goal. And then ultimately, the idea is that if we have that consistent for data collection, for your use, for our use, the whole driver of that is to save lives. And so we've all probably been paying attention. If we're in person, I would ask all of you to raise your hand if you think folks are driving better since the pandemic has started. And we get crickets, right? And when we see the high speeds, we see just the crazy driving behavior, and it's mostly in passenger cars. There's no question about that, but we have seen some disturbing trends in commercial motor vehicles as well, and we'll talk about those today. So next slide, please. Thank you. So what our charter is, you know, we are federal, state, and provincial governments. That's our tier number 1, folks. And then right after that, of course, are our industry members, but we also have local jurisdictions as well. More and more local departments, sheriff's departments, and police departments are beginning to inspect commercial motor vehicles. We want to make sure that they are accounted for and their voice is heard as well. You can see we want to be recognized as the leader in North American commercial motor vehicle safety and enforcement, and I believe that we are. With all of our member jurisdictions, with all our associate members, I don't think there's any question that we are definitely near the top, and in my opinion, the top of being recognized as the elite alliance in that regard. But then our mission, and I've talked about that, and I talked about it on the last slide. We want it to be uniform. We want to make sure that data is excellent for those folks out there who are making the policy decisions that we all have to live by. CVSA is not a governmental industry or association. We don't make regulation. We don't write regulation. We petition FMCSA on the behalf of both enforcement, but also on the behalf of industry when they have a need that's important too. Industry members get a vote in every one of our committees where we develop the out of service, we develop our ops policy, we develop our strategies, our bulletins, and they also get a seat and a vote on our board of directors. While it's more heavily compromised in law enforcement, their voice is critical. And then of course, components, gosh, I was a cop and an inspector and I know a few things, but when you get in there and start looking at mechanical components, I certainly need industry experts, whether it's braking folks or someone else to help us make those decisions. But we want that government funding to be spent usefully, not wasted, and we want it to be in the best interest of safety. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm keeping up on my end too, so I make sure I don't miss anything on my notes. As you can see what we do and who those governmental partners are. Of course, FMCSA, FHWA, PHMSA, NHTSA, and I'm going to stop there for just a moment because what you might notice is that those folks should all be underneath the umbrella of DOT, and they are in fact all underneath the umbrella of DOT, but FMCSA is going to deal with rules and regulations that you're probably most familiar with that you have to deal with every day. Hours of service is just the biggest example of that. Load securement, lighting, those kind of things. FHWA, size and weight. PHMSA, hazardous materials. NHTSA is more focused on cars. But interestingly, you really can't have one without the other, right? Especially in your industry. When we talk about, I was working on our emergency declarations portal the other day, and we're now including size and weights and permits and all sorts of good stuff for motor carriers and drivers to be able to move, especially when there's an emergency, and to know what those weight limits are. If a state may raise the divisible load weight limit, but you still have to get a permit for it. How does that work, and how do you know that's out there? But I remember on that call, one of the folks from FHWA said, hey, we want to prioritize this in your website, our emergency declarations website. And it was their permitting issue. And I said, that's great, but don't forget that I know you're focused on that because that's the grant you gave us. The industry and drivers, they still have to comport with potentially hours of service, lighting, load securement, all of those items. So for carriers, drivers, shippers, law enforcement out there, those things are not something you can just separate out, right? On every stop you make, you're looking at size and weight, but you're also looking at those safety considerations from FMCSA. And then of course, PHMSA as their hazardous materials transportation by rail. NHTSA, we talked about cars, we've got TSA, RITA, DOE is involved when we talk about the transportation of nuclear waste. And then of course, in Canada, it's Transport Canada, CCMTA. Mexico is SCT and their federal police. And then a little bit about what we do. We don't just write the out of service criteria. We don't just do our inspection procedures, but as talked about, we also lobby on folks' behalf. One of the things that I'm proud of is my work this last year on the highway transportation bill. So CVSA had a pretty big agenda. Almost everything was included on the House side. A few less things were considered on the Senate side. The Senate side is the bill that passed, at least for the most part. And so we got a lot of things accomplished. Training is now going to be a grant that's out there as an example. Some direction to FMCSA to do things differently congressionally when FMCSA is unable to prioritize that need, or for whatever reason, the staffers don't feel that it should be prioritized. Congress still does tell administrative agencies what to do. So next slide, please. This is the one I was talking about, our membership. Class 1 state and provincial memberships are pretty well maxed out on growing now because there's only one lead agency for every territory, province, and or country, right? Kansas has one, even though they may have subgrantees. And that subgrantee is going to be that second class there. You see locals. Right now, the majority of our locals come out of Ottawa in Canada, and they come out of Texas in the United States, but they're all our locals everywhere. Kansas has quite a few as well that are subgrant, or not even subgrantees of the patrol, but they also inspect commercial motor vehicles. If you've ever wondered how that works in practice, CVSA requires a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement, whichever term you want to use, with the state lead agency. That lead agency then is required to have one with those local departments. And what that means is they're all supposed to follow CVSA operational policy guidelines, whether it's OPS 4 for certification, OPS 5 for the inspection of certain types of defects, OPS 15 for what violations can be done, OPS 14 talks about how you cite things and what should be done roadside. Our associate members, that just keeps growing tremendously. You know, we had our CVSA conference last week, and I can't tell you the amount of folks who came up from industry asking for similar types of deals what we're doing today. I'll be presenting for Washington and their motor carrier association to reach those smaller carriers. I'm presenting for another group on road check as well. Really, what's important about that is we want to make sure we get this information out. When CVSA talks about being transparent, we really are. You can go to our website, you can get just about anything we have online. The one thing you do have to purchase is our out of service, and that's just because we do have to pay our staff and find a way to pay them in some manner or mechanism, and that material is copyrighted. But of course, as I mentioned, you do have a seat at the table for those voting rights. And then our federal members, which I've discussed, so I won't go back through that again. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, our regions, and just a little bit about how we're broken up, and I won't spend a lot of time on that because you can read it. But you know, each region, even as we talk about doing things uniformly, we can't exactly, right? Because I'll just even take my state, Kansas. If you've been to the eastern half of the state, it's beautiful, lots of trees, some rolling hills. Get toward the middle of the state, we have a whole bunch of cutouts for rocks and different ravines. It's really kind of different in Kansas, but you get to western Kansas and you get tumbleweeds and one tree. We do like to share that tree. We move it around western Kansas so everybody gets a little shade now and again. You know, make people feel like they're under the tree. But so it's even different within our state, and those are different conditions that you have to drive in. It affects your brakes differently, it affects speed differently. We have to close down the interstate in the western half of the state in the winter because we have snow that we don't have in the same way on the eastern side of the state. We may have the same amount, but our resources in those urban areas to clear that snow are much more prevalent than they are in western Kansas and the number of roads we have. So that's just one state, right? And if we look at our regions, the Northeast is completely different than when we look at, where's the word I want to see, region 4, where we have Washington and Wyoming. When you look at the East Coast, those roads are smaller, right? They were built for carriages originally. The weight limits are less. That infrastructure is in place, and without a complete overhaul of that infrastructure, you're never going to be able to carry the same weight or same width or same length on the East Coast that you can in Washington or Wyoming. So although we try and be uniform in the way we inspect things, there will always be some differences just because of the geography of the United States and the different weight limits and the different things on our roads. So that was the point of that slide. We do break it down. We do have those conversations. If we think about what may pass out of one committee, whether it's vehicle driver training, you'll see those here in just a second. It then has to go to that region, and they kick the tires on whatever may have passed out of there incredibly hard with diverse opinions, and that's before it ever goes to our board of directors and then to our entire membership for a vote. So that vetting process is incredibly rigorous as we make changes. Next slide, please. All right, our committees. My two that I'll highlight because they're my favorite, they're mine. Crash data and investigation standards. That's where we talk about the data that we get from road check, the data we get from post crashes. And then where's my other one? It is information systems, 3 lines down, first word there. And information systems, again, the data. So when we talk about what my title is, data and judicial outreach, my background, I was an inspector, of course, and I was certified in everything but PBBT, which is the performance-based brake tester, and and nuclear waste, so our level 6 program. So everything else, cargo tank, hazardous materials, other bulk, level 1, and then I did our crash stuff. And I can tell you that I was certainly not the best inspector. I would put my skills somewhere right there in the middle. I did the very best I could, but my focus when I was working the road were crashes. So my expertise is in kinematics, and that's just damage to the human body as you bounce around in a vehicle after a crash, and you can match that up and know where someone was and what injured them. That's important for the makeup of the cockpit of the vehicle. That's important if we need to determine who was driving. And then the defects that happen after a crash and those mechanical things, mostly on cars, a little bit on commercial motor vehicles. And our Terry Coomer is our CMV expert, and he is amazing as we talk about plumbing into brakes and making sure they were still working, and making sure that whoever is responsible for that crash or the causal factors in it are really accurate, so that whether it's civilly or criminally, and we've seen the nuclear verdicts out of Florida, and we've seen criminal prosecution, I think Colorado recently in that sentence, that prosecutors make correct charging decisions. And then information systems, much like we'll talk about today, how that data is amalgamated and brought together in FMCSA systems, and then what it means. Anybody can point to a set of data and just say, here's what it means. Well, your different point of view may affect that. We try and take point of view out of it and just show what the data is to get the best result from everyone. Driver traffic is concerned with generally hours of service, rules of the road violation, and enforcement and industry modernization is fantastic. It's dealing with the ADS vehicles and what are we going to do as that technology comes online. Of course, y'all are in Texas for the most part, and you actually do have driverless vehicles operating in Texas today. Now they have a driver in the vehicle or someone to operate the vehicle controls, but it's supposed to be driving by itself without that input. Well, what's that mean when we actually take that driver out of there? That committee is trying to work on it. The cameras work great until they get a little dirt on them. Well, who's supposed to clean that dirt? The driver, or am I supposed to do it as an inspector? So just a whole lot of questions that still yet to be answered as we try to move towards safety. And then you see our others, passenger carrier, of course. They have been in now a 3-year argument over the signage over an emergency exit door. So that's riveting if you ever want to go there for the passenger carriers. I kid a little bit, but it is critically important. We had one in Kansas where a new mom it's been almost 10 years ago now, but it made the national news, and I was pretty heavily involved in that. Came out of a passenger carrier vehicle. And that wasn't a bus that we traditionally think of. It was kind of one of those fly-by-night, after hours party situations, but those are really critical, and we need to make sure those are safe. Policy and regulatory affairs, that's our government stuff. Size and weight, of course, is critical. That's intertwined. Training, and then vehicle, which is usually a major component of road check. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go over all these. I'll look at them on the board. I know that's kind of a collage of a mess, but if I tried to put them all there in as bullets, it was either this mess or they were at 3-point font. So I went with this so you could at least read them. But we have a ton of stuff we do. Human trafficking, we renamed that. We thought it was better to call it human trafficking prevention rather than have the appearance that we were human trafficking. International road check, Operation Air Brake, you can look through them. Operation Safe Driver, which I used to be in charge of, but we do a lot of things. CVSA does a lot of stuff out there in every way, shape, or form we can to make things safer. Not just safer for vehicle crashes, but safer because we know human trafficking occurs. We know drug trafficking occurs, and we have a DIAP program for that, and that's drug interdiction. We talk about crashes, and 40,000 people are projected when the final numbers roll in from 2001. And by any metric you look at, that's some of the worst numbers we've seen when you start slicing it different ways since the 1940s. But we also know that, the increase in 2001 is the biggest since 1940. We're reaching average levels for vehicle miles traveled that we haven't seen since 87, 88, 89. BJ McKay and my best friend, Bear Days, a show that I loved when I was a kid. And I remember thinking, this is amazing.
Did you just make a BJ and the Bear reference?
I did. People don't take that as mockingly. That was my favorite show growing up. I loved everything about that, and I don't know, maybe somewhere back in the back of my nugget, that's why I got into to trucking to begin with, because I was riveted by how that actually works. But in any event, a lot of things we do, scholarships, all that kind of jazz. But as we're going back now 20, 30, 40, 50 more years with some numbers we haven't seen before, clearly we need to get back to some basics. But even as we talk about those fatalities, people have seen the fentanyl deaths, and those large portions of fentanyl are coming in through our southern border. That's no big surprise. I'm not surprising anybody by that. I'm not trying to be controversial, but it is coming in by either truck or passenger carrier car. They're not carrying fentanyl in their pockets where they're going. It's being transported by motor vehicle, and we do both in commercial motor vehicles and in passenger cars want to limit that. 100,000 people died there as an example. So we're dealing with some pretty staggering numbers that you and we can have an effect on to save lives. Next slide, please. All right, just some quick stuff. I'll move through this a little quicker so we can really focus on the meat and potatoes of today. Here's the stuff we do. We do our certification for roadside. Every inspector, federal or state, local, has to be certified to our standard. That's CVSA Operational Policy 4. We have our national training program, CVSA decal, which if you've been inspected during road check, hopefully you receive a decal, and that should prohibit a reinspection unless a defect, happens in the interim. Our out of service criteria focus heavily on education and outreach, and then also our policy development that we've talked about. And then it's a combination of the color for the quarter and a corner that we rip off, and that direction to the inspectors is in the back of our out of service criteria. Next slide, please. So critical inspection items, and this actually gets into the things that you need to worry about for road check. So in appendix, what that was G, and now magically changed to appendix A, in FMCSA's rules and regulations, these are the critical inspection items found in 396, or is it 396.6 and 0.7? One of those regs off the cuff. I can look it up for you if you need it, but it talks about both the critical inspection items for normal loads. And what I mean by normal loads is a non-intermodal. So your regular truck and trailer, straight truck, are going to be in one section of that regulation. Intermodal changes just a little bit with what you can inspect, but for your purposes, you want to try and inspect it all. Obviously, the brake systems we look heavily at. You can read through the list, but this is the list that you're required to do. Make sure that are functioning correctly in Appendix G. So, oftentimes we'll say, hey, we didn't have any out of service violations, but I didn't receive a sticker. And that's because you still had a violation that was a critical inspection item. So you can receive no out of service and not get a CVSA sticker because one of your violations hits one of these categories that's required in subpart A now of FMCSA's Title 49, 396. And so this is where that resides. That is why you may not receive a sticker, even though you don't have any out of service violations. We do want to give stickers everywhere we can, but if one of these comes up, our policy is that you don't receive a citation. And the reason is because the next step for this violation is that it may become an out of service critical inspection item violation. Next slide, please.
I just want to point out for some of you looking at this going, oh, that's a lot of different stuff. The good news, a lot of this is trainable. We have content, I know, in our library that covers a lot of these different systems, how to look for these things, inspect them properly so that you can train drivers to do it effectively. Mark, you and I are big fans of custom content. This would also be an opportunity to film one of your own folks, someone who on your team is a good driver that does a great pre-trip and post-trip inspection. Grab your smartphone, get out there on your yard, film them around your truck, looking at your gear, and then you have a custom piece of training that you can put up in the system. That's going to resonate more with your folks because it's your logo. It's people that they know doing that work. So, so think about that. If you don't already have some kind of custom piece of inspection content out there, now might be a perfect opportunity to get that done and then get it in the system so that you can put it out for training ahead of next month's event.
And I think that's a great point, Craig. And I would just add, if you happen to have our inspection procedure, or you have someone come show you what we do, if you train your drivers to do it kind of that same methodical way that we do it as well, you'll be seeing exactly what we look for. And our inspection procedure is designed to look for those things on that critical item list. And really, it doesn't have to be ours. Anything you have that's standardized, so you do it the same way every single time, that's how you know you don't miss something. And that's what we want. I don't care if you do it my way or the other way. I don't care if you go from left to right or right to left or driver to passenger or other way around. But as long as you hit each of those items and have a procedure in place, you're going to be looking really good for a roadside inspection. Okay, so the goals of our North American, that's what NAS stands for, inspection program: remove unsafe carriers, drivers, and vehicles from the highways. Again, facilitate that uniformity and then really reciprocity between the states. They need to recognize what each are doing and make sure that they are compatible together. We want to make sure that we direct attention to the rules and regulations. And we do use road check as education and outreach in so many ways that we can, but one of them is to make sure this is our opportunity really to have a chance to visit with the drivers and slow that inspection down and take a little bit of time and talk about what we're seeing as inspectors with those drivers. Take those questions. And then, of course, we do have to document violations that might be used in subsequent enforcement actions. That's something to be aware of. That is still our job as law enforcement, whether we like it or not, whether we have sympathy or empathy for the person that we have stopped. Our job is still to write that violation, write that citation especially when it is one of the table 38351 violations that could result in a disqualification either for that particular act or cumulative acts. So we still have a job that we have to do roadside. We may not like that job all the time. Certainly I never enjoyed writing people tickets or documenting violations, but that was the job. But bear in mind, and something that's really important to keep in the back of your head, and I've had this, unfortunate circumstance where a driver and carrier didn't fix something over time. And then that was one of the factors that led to a fatality collision that I worked, right? So it wasn't just the driver that then had a problem, it was now the motor carrier and each of those motor carrier officials that were the cause of it. And even if it's not criminal, in that case it was, some folks had to do some time over that. But if you talk about nuclear verdicts, if you are not fixing those violations and they are somehow the causal factor in a crash, you are just adding zeros and zeros and zeros to that nuclear verdict. Making sure that you repair those violations is critical to showing that your standard of care is meeting the regulations, and it seriously decreases, one, the opportunity for litigation, and two, the result of that litigation. And then, of course, data collection as well, so we can use the money effectively, which I've talked about at length. Next slide, please. All right, let's keep motoring. Those are our different types of inspections, our different levels. We've got a bunch of them. Level 1 is the gold standard. It's going to be the vehicle, the driver, and the vehicle in its entirety. You can look to the right there. I know that it's a little bit blurry, but it was hard to get it to fit on the screen. We do have that in much better view if you'd like to get that information. But 1 really encompasses everything there. Right there, you can see. In 2, it's way down there in step number 28, but it talks about the steering axles. So generally on a level 2, you're not going to get under the truck and actually be checking the axles, and you won't be checking the push rod travel. You can have some examples where, let's say it's a car hauler, right, where you can actually get under and check the front brakes, and we'd rather make sure that those are safe, but they're unable. I am certainly unable anymore to get underneath a car hauler effectively. I am not the young man I once was. So you can't get under there, right? The clearance is really low, or for some reason you're on a hill or something weird. But if we can check those brakes where we can, we will. That will not change it to a level 1. It'll still be a level 2 because they haven't checked the number of brakes that they have to make it a level 1. Level 3 is just driver only. One of the biggest things that happens, we still have, if we look back, going way back to the 70s and 80s, vehicles were not what they are now for safety. Also made very different out of steel and metal rather than fiberglass or composite like they are today. So then it was more common for a vehicle violation to maybe be a factor in a crash. Today, that's pretty rare. And we maintain our inspection level because we want to maintain the standards that all of us have worked so hard to achieve. But we do know that drivers are most often the cause of those violations, whether it's fatigue, impairment, distraction. Those are the 3 big ones. So we have a level 3 only. If you ever wonder what a level 4 is, those are special ones. If we're trying to gather data on some particular topic, those are going to change soon. FMCSA software, both the front end, the inspection software, and all of the back end systems are changing massively over time. Not something that you'll see really in your data, other than it should be much, much better. And that level 4 inspection will change pretty drastically. Level 5 is vehicle only. Typically that's going to be after a crash, during a safety audit, or during an investigation, formerly known as a compliance review. Mexico does a lot of their vehicle only inspections as well, a lot of level 5s. Of course, level 6, radiological shipments. That's some tough stuff if it were to have a release. So they have to have a level 1 before they're going. If something were to happen and they break down roadside en route, they have to have another level 1 before they can continue on. Those are the folks you don't want to mess with because they have the dark vans around them as well. Those people are very serious. That's not the truck to mess with. Not that you ever mess with the CNV driver, but especially not that one, because we've even had law enforcement stop him before, and there are a lot of guns pointed at the cop, and he's like, "Oh, what's going on here?" So we take that really seriously. Jurisdictionally mandated. Now that's something that you might think, what the heck is that? So our level 7, those never go to FMCSA, but many states have school bus inspection programs. That's how we're going to document those for the states who want to use the software to do it. And then the level 8 part of our enforcement and industry modernization, our ADS stuff, as that moves along, we want to make sure we're on top of that. So we hopefully can get to the point where we can do an automated inspection that doesn't slow you guys down and still keeps the current level of safety. Next slide, please. All right, I've talked about the sticker a little bit already. If you pass 0 defects in those critical ones, you're good to go. You get a sticker, good for up to 90 days. And generally they are waived on, not always. Sometimes you have an inspector who is new and forgets what a sticker means. Sometimes they may not see it and may have to move you on past that. Or sometimes you have a critical item that's popped up and they're going to inspect you. But generally speaking, we certainly try to honor those and make sure that you're not re-inspected within that 90-day period, maximum of 90-day period. Next slide, please. Okay, our out of service, just a quick, because we get this question a lot, so just want to make sure folks know what it is. Our out of service criteria, it is not regulation, and you wonder, well, then how can states even use it? What is this thing? How does this affect me? Why do I get put out of service? What in the world's going on? And you can read it up there on the slide, but it's not. What it is a best practice guide. And I'll explain to you how it works its way into law. So it is mentioned in the federal in the Transportation Acts, and I've got it written up somewhere in the act, just eluded me, but it is mentioned there where it talks about CVSA's out of service criteria. But what happens is these committees at CVSA develop their criteria in conjunction with industry, brake manufacturers, light manufacturers, all sorts of people. And when we transitioned from a halogen bulb to an LED bulb, oh my goodness, we had to figure out how to handle that, right? And we really did, because again, I know nothing about light bulbs, or I may not. So as that moves through, what happens is that becomes a best practice guide, and it means an imminent hazard, something that's either likely to cause a crash, increase the severity of the crash. That only happens for hazardous materials, because hazardous materials are never, if you're placarded wrong, it's never going to cause the crash. But should you have a spill of that hazardous material or nuclear waste, it could exponentially damage the environment. Or, I think I may have mentioned it before, maybe it was here, we had to worry about a train yard down in Kansas City at 6:35, and we tried to evacuate all of Wyandotte County, which is a couple million people, and I thought I was going to quit right then and there. An impossible task. Thankfully, there was no release, but those are on scales where thousands or hundreds of thousands of people or the environment could perish. And then what happens? Well, FMCSA can adopt it, which they have in places, and their regulations, certainly for the hazardous materials. But states also then adopt this document and this guidance into their state law. And once it is adopted either into their state law or into their regulation, that is how you fall underneath that guidance as those states adopt those documents, either each one as it's renewed every year, or they adopt it by reference and as it changes the new criteria or what you're held to in that state. Because remember, even though FMCSA set these rules, all your inspections, nearly all of them, except for the few that are done by federal folks, are done at a state level, under state authority, with that state's authority as a law enforcement officer. Next slide, please. Oh, got a blank one? We better just go to the next one. Oh, no, it's 3. It pops in there. Ooh, I got fancy with this slide. Go ahead. Pop them all in. There's one more. One more. Okay, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. I apologize for my insolence in making that happen. But here's what we're looking for, right? We do in every way we can, and I hope you've taken that from this conversation, is that collaboration, those relationships, those partnerships are really what save lives. If law enforcement is just strong-handed and we go in there, that's not cooperation. It's not collaboration when we set the out of service criteria. That's not going to save lives. It is a cumulative effort with our partners, and we're thankful and appreciate all of you. So that's the purpose of this slide. Next slide, please. All right, road check 21, and then we'll jump into 22, but a little background. So road check 21, next slide. As we conducted that last year, a little brief history as we talk about it. You can see from 1998 there, nearly 2 million inspections done during road check. Now remember, that's just those 3 days. So we do roughly 3 million-ish, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on officers any given year for inspections. But this is just 3 days since 98, and we're nearing 2 million inspections. We'll hit that in a couple of years. I should still be around for that, and we conduct those inspections. It is a 3-day campaign. We start on that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday and Friday are usually travel days. It's a 24-hour campaign. Some jurisdictions do run all 24 hours. Kansas used to when I was working it, for staffing reasons or safety for both the drivers and carriers and the officer. They may have moved that back to kind of more normal working hours, but we do try and do it 24/7, as you can imagine. We work mostly when the crashes occur, Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So it hits your 2 rush hours, and it's during the week. That's when the most other traffic is joining you out there on the road, because we know passenger cars cause or are the causal factor in most of those crashes. So that's when we try and be out there. But we also know that if you're a criminal and you know there is no law enforcement working between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., that if you're going to sneak something by, as we've talked about human trafficking, we've talked about drug trafficking, there's a whole, and I don't need to tell you guys about this, how many times y'all had a trailer stolen. So vehicle components, vehicle parts, trailers being stolen, that kind of activity, it's probably like your mom always told you, nothing good happens after 1 a.m. in the morning or whatever time she put on it, right? So not as many law enforcement out there. So we do try and run this one 24/7 for those 3 days that we can. Again, all 3 countries now participate, which is incredibly, incredibly valuable. Next slide, please. Real quickly, you can see that for yourselves. It is on the presentation. Guys, I think you're going to share this, but you're more than welcome to it. It's all public information. You can see that out of service rate, which is the gold line there, that's gone down over time. What you'll notice, though, since about 2017, it has kind of been steady. 17 was a little peak, and since then, it's been steady running into 2021. And consistently before that, it was on that downhill slide. If you can imagine, not so long ago, we had a 35% vehicle out of service rate in 91. I was around then, I wouldn't work in the road, but that's pretty big out of service rate compared to what we see today. Obviously, it corresponds with more than just level 1 inspections and more than just vehicle miles traveled. I know during road check, prices go up and you can make a little more money because there's maybe fewer drivers on the road, and that's a concern. I get it. So some historical information for you. We still need to drive those numbers down for both driver out of service rates and vehicle out of service rates. We don't want to put you out of service unless we have to roadside. Next slide, please. All right, so last year's, it was May 4th through 6th. Our focus was hours of service and lighting, and we had about 40,000 inspections. Traditionally, we have about 60 or 70. COVID has thrown a wrinkle in that, plus kind of all the jazz going out there in the world today with law enforcement and the public. So fewer inspections, fewer law enforcement officers, frankly, throughout the entire U.S., which means fewer inspectors. If you're an inspector, you're still a law enforcement officer, generally speaking. So now if you got less people, you may have to go to that domestic or that crash rather than focusing on the vehicle inspection. So we are seeing a decrease. We did find quite a few violations of hours of service. It was actually 45% of the driver out of service violations, which was a lot. And then lighting is always in our top 5 as well for vehicle violations. Next slide, please. So here you can see them. You see what we did last year. The majority of them were level 1. Of course, we do have almost 10,000 that were level 2. That's where you can't get to the brakes, or maybe you're not even level 1 certified for whatever reason. Level 3 is a pretty big focus as well. And rolling in with 1,200 was Mexico with their level 5 only. They are doing more level 3 now, which is fantastic. And you can see kind of those out of service rates. Now, level 1, and you would expect it to be higher than level 2 because you're checking the brakes, and vehicle brake components, wheel ends, like we're going to talk about today, are very likely to fail, or at least more likely to fail than other parts. It's more likely a wheel or rim to fail than your frame to crack, as an example. It's kind of a big example, but drastic one. But you can see that difference. So we do have more out of service on the level 1. Those are also your more highly trained officers as well. And I really can't explain why we have 0.6 driver out of service violations, but we jump to level 2 and we've got 5.8, and level 3, a driver focus only, 4.8. So those are anomalies that we want to take a look at this road check and over time and kind of see why that's going on. Not 100% sure right there. I can tell you the over the road are typically more going to be your level 1 and 2 inspections. I'm sorry, my lines are off there a little bit. You have to scroll down and right one to see level 1 match up with the number of inspections. But so it's possible those may be more of your local folks, your Nebraska Furniture March or trucking, 2-man type of deals. So they are probably going to have more hours issues if they don't leave and return to the work reporting location, all that kind of jazz. So happy to take questions on that. Some of it over time, we just have to take a look at, but that's 2021 stats. Next slide. So last year, what we found and what we typically find in some shape or order within the top 10, these violations always exist, something you should be aware of coming into 2022. 2 is our brake system is going to be retitled. Really, that's brake adjustments is what we're looking for there. The number of brake adjustments, not the entirety of the system. So that'll be a little clearer what we're talking about in the system. We'll get brake adjustment on number 4, and then what we mean by brake system, so that just the naming of that will change. Of course, tires, lights, and cargo securement. So as you take a look at this, the reason the slide is here is not just to show you what do we find in 21, but what's important for you on those critical inspection lists to focus on. Here's what most likely fails. Brakes are a little harder to check, whether they're out of adjustment or the system itself, but you can listen for those air leaks. You can take the time to check those push rod travels, especially before road check. But certainly some ones that we just shouldn't see as much as we do, and those are tires, lights, and cargo securement. Certainly they go out. Lights you can keep on the vehicle, as many as you can to replace as you go. We know tire failures happen, but the more we let that tread wear down, or we have the recaps, which are important, but those do fail more often than other items. And then of course, cargo securement, that's something generally you have direct control over, although we still recognize that sometimes shippers don't let you in the back of that trailer to check that. Next one. All right, so driver violations, and here, this is the one that I really want to talk about just for a second. So as you can see, 41% out of service, really. So I guess I would first say that flies in the face of FMCSA's hours of service violations don't exist anymore, when half of our driver out of service very nearly were for hours of service. That's pretty significant. Wrong class of license, my goodness, that's 20%. That's a highly regulated industry, and having the correct class of driver's license for the load that you have on, whether it's a cargo tank or hazardous materials, usually it's the endorsements that get you, but you'd be surprised how many times we find a CDL class vehicle and a non-CDL driver driving that vehicle. Of course, other, I am so excited to report to you that you will not see other again, I hope to goodness, in this top 5 or top 10. What other encompasses is drug and alcohol. So we're separating that out, drug and alcohol clearinghouse, not drug and alcohol violations, drug and alcohol clearinghouse. And it's the lower of the ones in other, but that adds up. The other one is medical certificate. I don't know why we've never, split that out, and not the certificate, but medical qualification. So if you're not actually qualified to drive, not that it's just not attached or something goofy happened, but you're not qualified to drive. And there was one other in there. I can't remember what it was, but when you added all those together, they ended up at that 16.6%, but it's much more important that we split that out. 1, so we don't have other as something that we're reporting. And then 2, so we know what those actually are. So next year that will be split out into those additional categories. Honestly, we've just not had the bandwidth to do it before. I had a little time available to me this year to dig into those numbers, and we're going to get that rectified for you. False logs, still way too many of those. And that's false when it's out of service. You can have a false log, which essentially is an oops, if we think about it. Didn't intend to do it, but let's say you're a new driver and you went to bed and you put that you were in the sleeper and you're in a day cab. Well, that log's false. You can't be in a sleeper in a day cab, but you didn't mean to. You're not trying to conceal any hours. You just wrong lined it or just didn't know. It's a violation, but we're not going to put you out of service for that. Or you use PC incorrectly. You thought you could do it here. You're still well within your driving hours for that day. It didn't help you, and it wasn't an attempt to conceal hours. You just used it wrong. You still had hours, so there was no reason to put yourself not on the driving line and drive where you needed to go to that rest area, as an example. So the false logs are an apparent attempt to conceal hours. And that's when that's going to be out of service. And then of course, suspended license, 4.6%, but that's still too many. Next slide, please.
Mark, I know you and I have talked about personal conveyance. I think we even talked with Chris about this. It's still an area that's a bit undefined in terms of what that means. You talk to 100 people, you'll get 100 different answers, not all of them correct. That is probably if you are a group that takes advantage of personal conveyance or allows that to be used by your drivers, training people on your definition of what that means is absolute necessity. You cannot personally convey yourself from San Francisco, California to Phoenix, Arizona. That is not what that is. But defining that and then training your people on what that is so they use that correctly will help that false log number come down.
Yeah, and I would add, and you go to the next slide, we got 5 more to get to, but the one more after that. But, with PC, one of the big things we heard as we talked about being out of hours, and if you're stuck somewhere to delivery and they said, hey, you can't spend the night here, you can't deliver till the morning, well, you're automatically in an hours of service violation. So PC was very helpful there, but it had some unintended consequences. For example, now you can be laden. So it made it really hard for roadside as well. Here's what I would tell you. I'm a lawyer also, and I do some litigation work. And what I mean by that is I consult with different folks about what they're seeing and what it means, because we want the best decisions to be taken forward. We don't want them to take silliness forward. And if you have that policy in place and your driver violates that policy, you've now helped define that your driver was operating outside the scope of what you've told them to do. So it can limit your liability. So it's always a good idea to have an effective policy in place, so that you protect your company, right? We all, even as a commander in the Highway Patrol, I had troopers that would step out of what policy was, and we had to rein them back in so they were fine. But we don't want that to affect those carriers. So a good policy in place is always a good idea when it comes to PC.
Absolutely.
All right, so how's road check work? We've talked about that at length. One of the questions we often get is, do they pick trucks at random? Sometimes that is the case. It depends on the state you're in. Sometimes you're in a probable cause state. If you're in a probable cause state or a reasonable suspicion state, that means they're going to start with a violation. I'm not a fan of those states because I'd like to be able to see us start without any violations. I do understand the counter argument. If you don't have a violation, why are you stopping me at all? But I always kind of personally felt bad starting out with, here's the violation that we're going to start with today. It's just not a positive tone to start on. So you can have PC states, reasonable suspicion, or random states, which Kansas was, called right of entry states. They're going to have some sort of inspection procedure, and it's a highly regulated industry. If you have that standard in place, the Supreme Court has said that is acceptable. Then you also have folks who just get together and they're going to do it at a scale facility, maybe an old scale facility, maybe someplace you came into the state and got a permit that wasn't a scale, maybe it was a vehicle inspection place, but somewhere they can bring a lot of trucks in, visit with drivers and screen them. The best way to think about this, if you ever have gone through a DUI lane or seen one before, they route everybody through, they do a quick screening. You had anything to drink tonight? You wearing your seatbelt, got a valid driver's license, feel free to go on. The next person comes in, oh, you're suspended, we got to talk. Or, oh, you've had something to drink, we got to talk. So that would be their screening process there. So there's lots of different variations of it, but it is not just at random. There's several different variations of that process. We do try and focus on level ones, which I really tried to talk about. I hope I've answered this question, but it depends on what the vehicle's going on, what the certification level of the officer is. So wheel-ins, this is a question that came in for a reporter. What exactly does that detail? That's kind of jargon in that it's anything that is on the end of the wheel, right? So we're looking at the tire, we're looking at the lugs, we're looking at the wheel itself. We're going to dig into those brake components, but it actually does have its own step in the procedure. It's steps 13, 15, 17, 18, maybe 19. But it is in our inspection procedure. And then it also has corresponding wheel end out of service in our out of service criteria. One of the questions I obviously receive is, what do fleets fret about road check? And you guys know what you fret about it. Being placed out of service, so many more law enforcement officers out there. The only thing I would say to that, my counter to that, is what I talked about earlier, that this is, especially if those places who are setting up at their scale facilities or another type of facilities, they really want to talk to you. That's their time where they get together with their kind of buddies in law enforcement. So they're feeling a little more relaxed. It's a safer environment. They have time maybe to visit with you or your driver and really talk about what's going on in a way that they may not have the same ability to do on the side of I-80 or I-35 or whatever interstate you're on. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to focus on those wheel ends. It includes the wheels, the rims, hubs, tires on a commercial motor vehicle. This is about a quarter of the out of service violations we see. So if I were to clump all these together, they would be a huge one. Obviously, you're going to see the biggest one because of tires. That's what jumps that number up so huge. But definitely hubs, rims, and wheels, as we see those different bent rims and we see lugs that are loose and or have been severed. All those things need to be in good working order. Let's see. Yeah, so that's all I want to say with that slide. Next slide, please. All right, one of the things I get asked a lot is, okay, well, do you put any guidance out there for either roadside or for industry? So much to the point talking about inspection G, if you were to download our International Road Check guidance document, you'll see the same thing inspectors do, and that's actually a full-page PDF. And on the right there, it's going to talk about the things we'll be focusing on. And the rest of that list is checking for cracks and unseated locking rings, studs and clamps, bent, cracked, or broken rims, loose, missing, or damaged wheel fasteners and elongated stud holes, cracks across the spikes in the web area or slippage on the clamps, regrooving in tires on the steering axle, can't have regrooved on the steering, proper inflation, bulges, cuts on those tires, exposed fabric or cord. So there's a list of them. There's about 15. I'm not going to read them all, but you are more than welcome to this material. You go to cvsa.org, cvsa.org, go to our inspections and road check, and you can download all of this material as well. It's also in our email blast that we send out to the public and the press. Again, no secret. We want you to have this material just like our inspectors do. Next,
we'll also put the link for that on the replay that we're going to send out to everybody that's on our call today. We'll have that link on there as well, so you can pull that as a resource, because we were talking with Chris. He's got a couple things that would be super valuable and helpful potentially for you guys to take advantage of, this being one of them. So we'll make sure that you have access to that, and then can download that and use that and train to it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, sir. Next slide. It just talks about our 37-step procedure. We've talked about that at length, so I won't focus on it, but those steps are 15 and 18 within that procedure. If you have the procedure to take a look. Next slide, please. So this is the information that we send out. This is what they are. We send this both to the press and to roadside officers. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. These two just talk about what's in our out of service and in our inspection guidance for what folks are supposed to look at. So this one is one, and then if you go to the next slide, it's going to have a few more bits of information on the steering system and the front suspension that we have to check for those components. One more after that. Okay, so before I talk about this, and you can see it up there above, one of the things that we use RoadCheck for, again, is we focus on it. That committee comes together twice a year at both our annual conferences, and we do pick the dates, we pick the topic or the focus area. We pick that focus area based on data. The other thing we do is we focus on, okay, where's a good topic to retrain or to have additional training to our law enforcement officers so they're doing this correctly. So if we talk about will ends, it is always critical for us to be able to put this guidance out and remind those inspectors that, hey, these are the things that you need to check to make sure they are giving you a proper inspection so they don't cite a violation that's not a violation, right? We want to make sure it's something that's legitimate, it's inside the regulations, it's something that you can actually fix. All of you probably had 396, 3A1 violations for something that was a component of the vehicle that isn't a violation of state law, and it isn't a violation of federal law, right? So you can't fix anything, you can't correct it. And so we use these as training opportunities and also education and outreach to the industry in those opportunities. So just important to tell you that. Our North American out of service, if you want to find out what you can be placed out of service for, we have it in 3 modes for you. You can actually get the my favorite, which is the left one, far left, and that's on my mobile device. It's a screenshot of it. I have the history going back to 2019 on that mobile device when we first deployed it. What's great about that is you can see live videos, our inspection bits. You can see full color pictures. You can really see our 37-step procedure or any procedure that we have for any of the levels. Obviously for level 3, it isn't 37 steps. I think it's 13. So all of those different things. The handbook is really the same. It's basically the handbook is translated into what you see on the left, which is our app. And then, of course, on the right, you can just straight up buy the old loose leaf or stapled out of service criteria and flip through that. I always kept one of those as backup in my car in case everything else failed. So next slide, please. All right, so great. I managed to take a whole hour with less slides. Craig, you told me I would do that. And I did it, and I didn't mean to, but I'm happy to stand.
Right.
I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Awesome. So
I got a quick question for,
I knew you would,
Mr.
Mark.
Turner. 2021, you had 40,000 inspections. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And there were some limiting factors with COVID. What do you anticipate for 2022?
Yeah, so I don't know. We are stressing to have more violations. I definitely want to get a higher number than 40 if we can, but honestly, I don't know. We could see more, we could see less. I think there's an appetite to see Warren get back out there and re-engage with the public. But at the same time, there are, look, I'll just be transparent. Law enforcement officers are retiring left and right. and they don't want to do the job anymore for the reasons that we've seen. So because of that, your specialty units are having to take other calls. So the volume's down. What we've been talking to law enforcement is that, at least during the CMV inspections, you're dealing with professional driver, professional companies. Generally speaking, these are good folks every day. If I stop a passenger car at 2:30 in the morning in Wyandotte County, that is not the same interaction that I'm going to have with a professional driver roadside. Stopping these guys on the side of the road, if we're doing our jobs properly, is such a positive interaction that it reminds you that there are good folks out there that you can interact with in law enforcement that aren't that combative, because that's not what we want this to be. So to answer your question, I don't know. I'm really interested to see what will happen this year. My guess is somewhere between 40 and 50. And I guess we can revisit that after the fact and see where we land.
We'll look at those numbers in June. You
Yep.
also mentioned fatalities are estimated for 2021 at approximately 40,000. Can you connect the dots there to lower inspection numbers to fatalities, or is that a stretch?
No, it's not a stretch. I can tell you what the categories, generally speaking, are. It's speeding. That's going to be mostly with the passenger cars, right? Because they're the ones weaving in and out of traffic. But even with commercial motor vehicles, we've seen an increase in not alcohol consumption, although that's a little bit, hair increase. But we've seen a significant increase in commercial motor vehicle drivers who are under the influence of drugs other than alcohol. It is significant. It's whether it's marijuana, which is legalized in so many different places, or it's a different type of medication. We had, if you look at the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, who would have thought there were that many people who had failed somewhere? That's staggering. It's sickening. It's staggering. I feel for those people, but those people at the same time, there was a crash out, and I think it was Arizona, could have been Utah, don't hold me to it, but someone who had been disqualified and downgraded through the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. So now they're driving a straight truck. There were 7 motorcyclists, and their follow car, because it was so windy, had moved in front of them. And the NTSB reported this out to us. And so when that follow car moved in front to break the wind for them, someone who'd been in the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, and although their CDL was disqualified, their regular driver's license wasn't, killed all but one, ran over every one of them, smashed through them so hard that they hit the follow car. So those incidences are out there. I'm not saying they're prevalent. I'm not trying to pick on CMV drivers, but do be aware that it is increasing in the CMV field, as well as, and even more so in passenger cars. The 4-wheelers and 2-wheelers have a greater increase, but it's happening here as well. So, there is some correlation. Now, look, causal versus correlation are not two things that you can put together. I'm not a probability guy in that mechanism, but I am pretty long in the tooth, and I can tell you we're seeing more of those things. At the same time, we're seeing fatalities go up. So certainly they are a factor in more crashes than they have been in the past.
All right, so those of you on the call with us, if you have questions for Chris, go ahead and fire those off in chat. I know we had some folks, Chris, to reach out to us ahead of time as soon as they found out we were having this and sent us some questions. So we'll go ahead and read. This one is from Phil with Volume Tank Transport up in Ontario. If a nut is properly torqued on a stud and ends up flush with the stud, so only one or no threads showing, is that a violation of that? And if so, what violation?
Okay, so I think my answer to that is no. I'm going to preface this real quick. When I told you I was a medium inspector, you could jump into specifics on an inspection that I'd have to double check and look up. Sure. So I don't know for certain. Off the cuff, though, I don't think that is a violation. Because I think you said in that example that they were parallel with the threads. It had gone down far enough that it was still tight and right even with it. I don't think that's a violation off the cuff. Okay. If somebody wants to correct me, feel free to. The violations themselves on the mechanics of the vehicle, I'm not your foremost expert. That's actually going to be Carrie Workowski up in your neck of the woods. And Carrie can talk me under the table any day about vehicle violations. She is amazing.
All right. Well, this is a good question that's I think is applicable to anyone that has one of these. If a driver does receive a violation that they don't believe is legitimate, is there a polite way of suggesting to that inspecting officer that they are wrong?
Yeah. And guys are way more receptive. I say guys, people are way more receptive to that than they used to be. So here's how I would approach it. I'd say, hey, thank you for showing me that, or thank you for this inspection. Do you mind showing me where that violation is? And hopefully they will, as long as it's a safe environment. That's what we ask them to do from CVSA. If they don't, there's not much you can do about it there, but it can lend you some credibility in your data queue challenge, and that you asked to see this violation. They didn't show it to you. You wanted to correct it. So that's some fuel for your data queue. Then if they will, then you got a chance to snap a picture. Say, hey, I want to take a picture of this. I want to make sure my boss sees it. I mean, obviously you're doing it for your record keeping as well, but you don't have to highlight that. I want to show my boss, like we always do. We blame our bosses for everything. That's what I do when I mess up, or he blames me, or what it is. And then you say, hey, may I get, so they know this was taken right here. May I get your, at least part of your uniform in the picture, so they know that you were here. Time or date stamped on the phone. It's not illegal to take a picture or record a law enforcement officer. Now be careful, and that sometimes not all cops know that's not illegal, and you can get that. You've seen them on YouTube, right? So try not to get in that situation. But yeah, just ask. And one of the mechanisms we use as teaching, especially with adult learning, is one of the things we'll say is, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. I might be wrong and you might be right. Show me where that is in the regulation. And you're going to hear crickets because you can't find it in the regulation. So that's another really effective way. So, sir, ma'am, may I see what you're talking about on the violation? It'd really help me make sure I get it right in the future. Or, hey, can you show me where that's at in the regulation so I can show my boss, so I can make sure they know I need to fix it. So those are what really verbal judo tactics that we teach in law enforcement. Turn those around on that law enforcement officer, because then they look terrible for not showing you that, right? Because we want to do that. So yeah, I think there is a respectful and a kind way to do that. And the feedback I've gotten from drivers when I gave them that advice over time is, hey, you know what? That actually worked. They took a minute to show me that violation. So in my experience, that's been an effective tool.
I know also when we did last year's prep session, the officer that we had join us said that, hey, if there was one thing that he could have you teach your drivers to do while they're out on the road to make the interactions with them go smoothly, it was how to upload their records of daily service out of their ELDs.
Oh, goodness, yes.
Yeah, if your driver knows how to do that, that will actually improve the interactions, I won't say immediately, but very quickly with the troopers involved, because it means that their job just got easier. They don't have to help your driver figure out how to use your technology. And yes, I know some of you are going to go, it's just a button. Gang, I'm a technology company. We take calls every day from people where it's just a button. It does not hurt to reiterate that, retrain people on that. It's a perfect training opportunity in just some of those basic functions that will improve those interactions on the side of the road.
It's like, I'll comment there, it's like a sigh of relief when you have a driver who knows how to do that, because it makes everybody safer and easier. So I would second and third that and pass that unanimously, because that is such a big deal when a guy goes, yeah, sure, hold on, here you go. Yeah. And there it's in our computer, that's such a relief. So that is a great way to start an inspection.
We've got a question here from Marvin. Is there inspection criteria for non-CLD hotshot drivers in their vehicles?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that at random? And do they get the level 1 or level 2?
So yes, is kind of the answer to all of that. Yeah, the same inspection criteria is used on those non-CDL vehicles as well. Obviously, different things. So you're not, generally non-CDL vehicles are not equipped with air brakes, so we don't have push rod travel, just as an easy example. So we don't, not measuring anything there. But aside from that, they're still checking, getting in there and checking and making sure if the pad, if they can see it, if any rotor's bent, if the wheel is bent, if they're making good connection, if there's not any rust in those calipers or drums. We want to make sure that that works. So that is part of the procedure. For certain, they can as well have consequences to their driving privileges. And then as far as a level 1 or level 2, it just, again, much like the CDL qualifying vehicles, it just depends on what is available there to be inspected. But I will tell you that the smaller non-CDL vehicles are typically much easier to do a level 1 on, because you can almost always get underneath those vehicles to do that check. Oftentimes they're the ones that have the smaller trailers, right? So we have emergency and breakaway braking items that we have to check. And then a lot of times we have state law for chain requirements as well, depending on if it's a full trailer or if it's a trailer. Of course, the difference being, you guys know it probably as well as I do, whether or not it's resting on the power unit or whether or not it's being towed by the power unit on a ball and hitch type deal. So, but yeah, absolutely. And they are the same inspection criteria, and they also can get a CVSA sticker too.
Excellent, excellent. And I know some of the questions that we get specific to our system, tire content. Yes, we have tire content in our library. We have some of it that we actually got from Michelin. Michelin is very active about putting out training on how to make sure that you're evaluating your tires correctly and knowing when you need to switch them out, or preventative maintenance to make sure that you take care of them before something catastrophic happens on the side of the road. Because if something does, spare items for those kinds of problems. I mean, obviously a driver can carry spare lug nuts, but carrying spare rims and spare tires around, unless you are in that business, is probably not going to be a reasonable expectation. I know
Right.
last year we talked about being able to carry spare bulbs so you can address lights right on the side of the road. Don't always have that option with tires. So making sure that pre-trip, post-trip inspection of the power unit, we have content on that. Actually just revamped it as part of our ELDT training that went out there. So that's something that you can assign out. But these are all things that you can train people on pre-trip and post-trip inspection and assign content so that when they get done with it, they know what to look for if there's a problem. Before they hit the road, they know what to look for if there's a problem. And that way we're able to drive that number down on lights for this year. So I'd love to, take that down from that 1,400 number, cut that in half. How much better would that be for the data that's going to the federal government about how trucking companies are improving on the road? So that would be tremendous. So, because like you said, Chris, and back in our data queue webinar, we want good data. We want good data about the good things that you guys are doing on the road. That's why we have the session that we did on data queue, so that you can dispute items that come up that are incorrect. That way that the federal government who's looking at this information has an accurate picture of what the reality is of what you all are doing on the road, which by and large is great. You've got good people under power on the roads every single day without issue. And unfortunately, the news, if we took all of our feedback from that, would paint an entirely different picture, which is not accurate. But let's see here. We've got some other questions coming in. Can we get a copy of this recording? Yes, we will be sending a follow-up email with a version of the webinar recording so that you can share that with other people on your team as well. So give us a day or two to get that all put together, because my sound video monkey guy has to be able to edit it all down and make sure it's pretty and airbrush Chris, myself, and Mark to make us look nicer.
Yeah, 20 pounds, please.
Awesome. Well, Chris, looks like the questions, you've covered a lot of information, but I don't have anything pending that people need to ask. I did want to make mention for you, Mark, that we did have someone say hi specifically to you, because he was with FFE for 10 years in maintenance, Jason Wickens. So I don't know if you know Jason.
Sure.
He joined us today. So, but we're about 15 minutes over. We appreciate those of you who have stuck it out with us. We know this will be beneficial, though, in the long run, to making sure that your drivers have good experiences in their inspection situations coming up here in just a little over a month. So it's time to get the training and preparation for that out now, so that your people have that information ahead of time. You do not want to be launching your training for road check the week of road check. Because that means there are going to be people on your team that are not going to have that done when they need to have it done for it to be impactful for your fleet. So, but Chris, thank you again for your time, sir. It is always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Let me see if we got some other stuff
Should be a good opportunity for some of these carriers to get some clean inspections, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get a lot of clean. We do give a ton of stickers out too. So, and remember, that's good for several months. So start now.
I know a lot of carriers. I know a lot of carriers even give bonuses, which I would certainly support. But thank you very much. And this is another successful industry enforcement program that CVSA has highlighted and is the charm of the industries of other industries. So thank you very much for all you do to make that work, Chris.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Guys.
That's not an easy task.
And one other thing before we break today, obviously trucking companies are stakeholders in what you guys do. If someone that joined us today wanted to find out more about participating in CVSA as one of those partner organizations, what's the best way for them to go about that?
Yeah, so a couple things I recommend. I'm glad you mentioned it. I'll be as quick as I can. One, reach out to your lead mix app agency and say, hey, can we help? Can we be a good partner to you? You can find those direct phone numbers and direct emails to every one of those lead contacts. Go to cvsa.org. There's a little, you don't even need this is public information. There's a little at the very top of the header. It says contacts. You can contact staff, but you can contact each lead agency person. I was always so grateful when I was Commander Kansas. I got that phone call. Hey, can we partner? Can we do something? What can we do? One of the things that you and I talked about before we started this is really, this is a great opportunity. I think, we used to do teens and trucks for those of you who remember that. And maybe right now it's a good time to refocus on that and say, hey, our local high school's putting something together. All sorts of little towns throughout Kansas that happens as they turn into that driving age. But with FMCSA looking to potentially allow interstate 18-year-old drivers, if you want to get to those drivers in both a safety mechanism, so those young folks are driving better around your truck, but also, treat that a little bit like a career day, I think you've got a great opportunity potentially there for a partnership. So reach out to your local folks, and hopefully they can go with you to that school. And it also sees law enforcement and drivers working cooperatively together in a conversation. And I think that is nothing but healthy for both those two actors, the companies, and those young people to see. So that's a great example of a way to partner. But folks also are happy to come to your place of business and give a talk on a weekend if that's when you're shut down or whatever day of the week it is. So a lot of opportunities, but if you don't reach out and communicate, we never know that you want to partner. So it's important for you to be able to reach out to us, and then law enforcement will be more than willing to try and partner with you where they can throughout the year. Thank you for that question.
And there's no size requirement either. We were talking before the call today, the 5 truck company is just as important a stakeholder in this whole thing as the 1,000 truck company. So don't feel like just because you are not Swift and have thousands and thousands of drivers on the road every day that you don't have a seat at the table or a voice in making our industry safer. So I recommend that if you haven't looked at CVSA, they are one of the most dynamic groups out there in terms of the things that they are actively doing to improve safety, to make our drivers all safe on the road, and also the driving public around them. So who, as we've mentioned a number of times, needs a lot of help, more so than we need help to be able to get from point A to point B safely. So. Excellent. All right, gang. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. We appreciate you. We want you to continue to be safe out there. And Mark and I will be joining you again with another webinar here in the very near future.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everyone.
May 17th through 19th. Thank y'all.